It started as a statement of power. AOC, known for her sharp voice and unapologetic stances, stood on the steps of the courthouse surrounded by flashing cameras and a wall of microphones. Her eyes were focused, her tone was confident, and her message was clear. This isn't just about words, it's about truth. When a powerful man spreads falsehoods to silence a woman who speaks up, there must be accountability. The crowd behind her roared in agreement. Supporters held signs reading truth over smears and "We stand with AOC." Social media flooded with hashtags within minutes. Hashtag OCFK began trending by noon. The lawsuit itself was bold. She had filed charges of defamation against Senator John Kennedy, claiming that comments he made during a recent televised budget hearing had not only damaged her reputation, but painted her as dishonest, manipulative, and unfit for public office. It wasn't just a court case. It was a spectacle. It's a kind of moment that makes headlines, garners opinion pieces, and shapes legacies. And AOC knew it. In the weeks before the trial, her team released a series of carefully crafted media posts, highlighting her integrity, her track record, and her battles against political patriarchy. Major networks scheduled full-panel breakdowns of the legal merits of the case. Legal analysts predicted a smooth victory. One even said, "There's no way Kennedy walks out of this unscathed." His language wasn't just inflammatory, it was personal. Everything seemed airtight, until Kennedy did something no one expected. He didn't push back. No press conferences, no viral tweets, no damage control tours across conservative media. Just a brief written statement from his office that read, "Senator Kennedy intends to defend himself fully and truthfully in court. He welcomes the opportunity for all facts to be heard. No drama. No spin." That silence was unsettling because everyone expected a fight. A war of words. Kennedy had always been the type to go down swinging, but this time he stayed quiet. Inside his legal team's conference room, the strategy was simple. Don't challenge her story. Expose it. Not with volume, with one voice. One person. While AOC's legal team prepared a courtroom strategy rooted in public emotion and political character, Kennedy's team had been digging deep into her early years, her activism days, her rise through grassroots movements and the people who had once stood beside her. Before the spotlight came, that's when they found him. A man who had stood beside AOC when she was still just Alexandria. Before the congressional halls, before the debates, before the cameras. A man who had watched her transformation not from a distance, but from the inside. And more importantly, a man who never wanted to speak, till now. He had no political ambition, no grudge, no book deal, just one story to tell and one piece of truth that would crack the case wide open. His name wouldn't appear in headlines, at least not yet. But within days, he'd become the single reason AOC's carefully built case crafted with precision. Power and purpose would collapse in just 9 seconds. Behind closed doors, John Kennedy wasn't smiling. He wasn't arrogant or smug about the lawsuit. In fact, he barely even mentioned AOC's name to his staff. But what he did mention again and again was the need to let the facts speak louder than the headlines. "You don't win against a tidal wave," he said. "You just show people the sand underneath when it passes." Most assumed Kennedy would lean into his usual sharp-tongued Southern sarcasm. They expected clever jabs, Fox News exclusives, and public mockery of AOC's legal logic. That's what the playbook said. But Kennedy had torn that playbook up. Instead, he made a call to a man he hadn't spoken to in over 5 years. Raymond Dill, a former investigative journalist who had quietly transitioned into private legal research after exposing a financial corruption scandal years ago. Kennedy didn't need spin. He needed a thread, and Raymond found it. It was buried in an old university blog post, dated 2012. AOC had written an impassioned open letter during her time at Boston University. The piece wasn't controversial back then. It was filled with the same progressive fire she later became famous for. But what caught Raymond's attention wasn't the letter itself, it was a comment beneath it. From someone named Julian V., the comment was respectful, subtle, but it read, "Sad to see how far you've bent your beliefs just to get attention." I remember who you really were, was the thread. Raymond began digging, and what he uncovered was more than a passing comment. Julian Vega wasn't a troll or an anonymous critic. He had been AOC's close friend during her college years. Some even said they dated briefly. They had worked together on community outreach programs, youth shelters, and local tenant campaigns in the Bronx before AOC entered the national spotlight. More importantly, Julian had stories and documents, not to hurt Herb, but to clarify what really happened in a series of events. She had built her narrative upon. Kennedy's legal team arranged a quiet meeting with Julian. He was reluctant, even resistant, at first. He made it clear he had no interest in becoming a political weapon. But something shifted when he read AOC's recent court affidavit, specifically a section that detailed an old housing rally and how a betrayal from a male colleague had shaped her political awakening. Julian stared at that paragraph for a long time. I didn't betray her, he finally said. I begged her not to lie. Kennedy didn't need to coach him. Julian didn't need to be told what to say. He was the kind of witness lawyers dream about: credible, emotionally grounded, with a memory like a vault and a voice that carried truth without theatricality. The media had no clue. As AOC's legal team marched forward with confidence, crafting a courtroom strategy filled with photos, testimonials, and fiery rhetoric, Kennedy's team sat with Julian in a quiet room and listened. He didn't speak like a man with a grudge. He spoke like a man finally relieved to say what he had. Buried for years, they didn't need 100 witnesses. They needed one. And in just a few days, that one man would sit in a chair, raise his right hand, say words that would echo far beyond the courtroom walls. The courtroom was packed. Every seat taken. Journalists crammed into the press box with notepads, cameras, and earpieces buzzing. Cable networks rolled out breaking banners before opening arguments even began. AOC walked in, flanked by her legal team, dressed in a crisp navy suit, eyes focused straight ahead. She didn't acknowledge the cameras this time. She didn't need to. Her presence was the headline. This wasn't just a trial. It was a performance. And AOC had rehearsed every moment of it. Her lawyers opened strong. The lead attorney, Melissa Rhodes, painted a picture of emotional harm, public humiliation, and targeted political misogyny. She called Kennedy's televised comments a calculated attempt to delegitimize a rising leader and a smear campaign masquerading as old-school Senate banter. The jury leaned in. Senator Kennedy, Rhodes said, her voice steady and direct, didn't just disagree with my client's policy, he aimed to destroy her credibility, using rhetoric intended to make her seem unstable, dishonest, and un-American. Nodded subtly as the attorney spoke. Her posture radiated confidence, like she knew justice was already inching toward her side. The early evidence was compelling. Clips of Kennedy's remarks played on the courtroom monitors. Phrases like "she spins stories better than a spider." An election season, and it's hard to trust someone who changes her. Background more than her lipstick were delivered with his signature Southern charm. But now they echoed with a different weight. They were political punches, but in a courtroom. Became legal liabilities. Then came the emotional foundation. AOC took the stand. She spoke with clarity. She told the jury about growing up in the Bronx, about watching her father die when she was 19, about working long nights as a bartender while trying to push for social justice by day. Her voice cracked slightly when she described the fear of being labeled a liar in front of millions of people, especially when so much of her public image was tied to authenticity. I've never claimed to be perfect, she said, eyes locked on the jury, but I've always fought for the truth. And when someone with that much power calls you a fraud, it doesn't just sting, it sticks. The room went silent. For a moment it felt like the trial was over before it began. The jury appeared moved. The judge, while stoic, clearly gave her space to speak freely. The press typed furiously. Outside news alerts pinged across phones. AOC delivers powerful testimony against Kennedy. Emotional turn and high-stakes lawsuit. By the end of the first day, it felt like Kennedy was losing ground fast. The only thing his team had done was quietly sit and take notes. No rebuttals. No aggressive objections. Just silence. Critics called it weak. Supporters called it strategy. But one thing was certain. OC had set the tone. She had the courtroom. She had the public, and for now, she had the upper hand. What no one knew was that Kennedy's team wasn't reacting because they were waiting for one moment. One chair. One witnessed in 9 seconds that would change everything. Day 2 opened with calm. On the surface, AOC's legal team continued its momentum, calling character witnesses, presenting handwritten notes, and replaying the clips that had stirred controversy months earlier. It was a masterful display of narrative control, show vulnerability, tie it to credibility, and seal it with political gravity. But John Kennedy barely said a word. He sat with his legs crossed, scribbling occasionally in a yellow notepad, looking more like a grandfather waiting for his turn at the DMV than a senator fighting a lawsuit. Pundits online were already mocking. His silence, #silence senator, began trending that afternoon. Then it happened. Kennedy's lead attorney stood, straightened his tie, and said calmly, "Your Honor, the defense would like to call Julian Vega to the stand." There was a pause. A beat. AOC blinked slowly, almost unsure if she heard that name right. Her attorney leaned in to whisper something, but she didn't respond. Her hand gripped the table for just a second. It was the first visible crack. Julian Vega wasn't a household name. No one in the press pool had him on their radar. Even court sketch artists glanced around confused, trying to figure out who this guy was. He walked to the stand with no security, no entourage, just a plain gray jacket, jeans, and a backpack. Mid-30s, lean build, tired eyes. He didn't look like a bombshell witness. But that's what made him so dangerous. He was ordinary. And that made him believable. The oath was taken. The courtroom hushed. Kennedy's attorney started gently. "Mr. Vega, could you please tell the court how you know Representative Ocasio-Cortez?" Julian nodded. "We met in college, Boston University. We worked together in a housing rights coalition. Stayed friends after that. For a while." "And were you?" "Involved in the 2011 Jackson Heights housing march that Representative Ocasio-Cortez referred to in her affidavit." A pause. Julian nodded again. "Yes, I helped organize it. I was there the entire time." "Did Representative Ocasio-Cortez speak at that event?" Julian cleared his throat. She wasn't scheduled to, but she did. She kind of took the mic during the final speech, spoke from the crowd. The prosecution objected. Irrelevant, speculative, but the judge overruled. The defense had documentation. Then the moment came. The attorney pulled out a printed screenshot and handed it to the judge, who passed it to the jury. "Mr. Vega, is this your comment on Representative Ocasio-Cortez's 2012 blog post?" Julian leaned forward, squinted, then nodded. "Yes, that's mine." The attorney looked toward the jury. "Mr. Vega, could you read your comment out loud?" Julian took a breath, and then said the words, "Sad to see how far you've bent. Your beliefs just to get attention. I remember who you really were." Auk looked down. No expression. The courtroom stayed frozen. 9 seconds. That's all it took. No shouting. No accusation. Just a single sentence that reframed everything. The press didn't even know how to cover it. Was it betrayal? Was it revelation? What was? This actually saying? But the jury knew. This wasn't just a man sharing his opinion. This was someone who had been there, someone whose memory threatened to unweave the carefully knit story AOC had placed before them. Because if that sentence was true, what else wasn't? The air in the courtroom turned thick. AOC's legal team scrambled. Her lead attorney stood up so fast, she nearly knocked over her chair. The judge, sensing the room's tension, leaned forward slightly. Eyes locked on Julian. "Vega, Mr. Vega," Melissa Rhodes began, voice sharp but composed. "You've just read a comment made online over a decade ago. Do you consider that a credible basis to undermine a sitting congresswoman's testimony?" Julian didn't flinch. "I consider it a reminder," he replied calmly. "A reminder of how stories evolve. Sometimes, too, inspire, other times to hide." Something. That answer stung. The jury exchanged glances. Rhodes doubled down. You haven't spoken to Representative Ocasio-Cortez in years. How can you claim to know what she believes today? I can't, he replied quickly. But I know what she used to believe. I know what she said when there were no cameras. No hashtags, no donors? And that version of her? It would have walked away from this lawsuit. Gasps whispered across the room. Kennedy didn't even blink. He just stared forward, silent, letting the words do the work. Rhodes tried to regain control. She pulled out emails, attempting to show Julian had once applied to AOC's campaign team in 2018, something that could suggest bitterness or rejection. But Julian admitted it openly. I thought I could help, he said. But when I saw what her campaign had become, I walked away. I didn't recognize it anymore. Then came the pivot. Mr. Vega, Rhodes said, shifting tactics. Do you have political affiliations? Are you registered with any political party? An independent, he said. I don't trust either side. That's why this matters. There it was again. Believability. He wasn't a Republican plant. He wasn't a Kennedy fanboy. He was just a guy with a memory, a paper trail, and a quiet voice that echoed louder. Then all the shouting outside the courthouse? The media frenzy escalated? CNN? Unknown witness undermines AOC's lawsuit? Trial takes sharp turn, Fox News? Hero or traitor? Julian Vega's 9 words rock political landscape Twitter. Hashtag Julian said it was now trending. No. One globally. Back inside. Oak sat still, stoic, hands folded. She knew what was happening. You don't lose a trial all at once. You lose it in moments, in slips, in silence. In a look from the jury you can't quite explain, the witness hadn't accused her of a crime. He hadn't yelled or pointed fingers. He had simply told the truth, so he remembered it, and that truth was beginning to unravel her entire case. Kennedy's team rested for the day. No final dramatic cross-examination. No fireworks. They didn't need them, because the real damage had already been done. The court could feel it. When court resumed the next morning, the vibe had shifted completely. Gone was the buzz, the hopeful energy from AOC's camp. Her supporters in the gallery were quieter. Reporters weren't asking about the outcome anymore. They were asking if she'd withdraw the case. But Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez didn't speak to the press. Not that morning, not that evening. Not even on her famously active Twitter feed. Silence sent its own message, and the political world knew how to read between the lines. Inside the courtroom, her legal team looked like they'd aged 10 years overnight. They had one move left. AOC, herself. Her lawyers knew the only way to counter the devastating effect of Julian Vega's testimony was to let AOC speak for herself. Direct, passionate. After all, that was what made her a star in the first place, so they made the call. They put her on the stand. The courtroom leaned forward, collectively holding its breath as AOC walked to the witness box. She was dressed modestly, no flashy colors, no bold accessories, just a dark blazer, hair tied back. Eyes calm. Her oath rang out clearly, and then her attorney asked, "Congresswoman, do you believe your integrity has been attacked unfairly?" She looked at the jury and paused, visibly collecting herself. Yes. I believe the very core of what I fight for, truth. Fairness and justice has been twisted into something cynical and unrecognizable in this courtroom. There it was. Conviction. The fire. Her words were sharp and confident, echoing like a speech in Congress. She denounced Kennedy's comments as dog whistles wrapped in Southern charm, and declared the lawsuit wasn't about ego, it was about decency. People nodded in the gallery. One reporter mouthed, "She's back." But Kennedy didn't flinch, and then came the fatal misstep. AOC, wanting to reclaim her narrative, brought up Julian Vega. I was surprised to see Julian here, but not shocked. People from your past, they resurface when the cameras are on. Was subtle. It's almost offhand. But it was a mistake, because in trying to discredit Julian, she turned him from a quiet memory into a martyr for the moment. The jury saw it. The defense team smiled just slightly. The judge raised an eyebrow. Worse, she added. He wasn't a key part of my life. He was in the background. Not someone who truly understood my journey. And just like that, the prosecution's foundation cracked again, because the more she distanced herself from Julian, the more authentic he seemed. And the more authentic he seemed, the more likely it was that he'd spoken the truth. The defense didn't even need to challenge her testimony. They knew the court of public opinion, and possibly even the jury, had already made up its mind. Outside, storm was brewing online. Clips of Julian's 9-second statement were spliced with old footage of AOC at protests, interviews, and tweets that now looked different. The narrative had shifted, and no one could stop it. By the time AOC stepped down from the witness stand, her speech had been bold, her posture strong, but her impact diminished. Because no matter how loud a voice may be, sometimes the quietest truths echoed the longest, and Julian Vega's 9 words were still ringing by now. Everything had shifted from the witness bench to the jury box. What started as a clear-cut defamation lawsuit had morphed into something far more complicated, far more human. Jurors don't live in a vacuum. They feel the tremors in the room, the weight of a moment, the honesty in a voice, or the absence of it. And from the moment AOC stepped down from the stand, the expressions of those 12 jurors began telling their own story. One juror, an older woman with silver glasses and an upright posture, had scribbled pages of notes during Julian Vega's testimony. She didn't write a single word during AOC's. Another juror, a young man in his 20s, had been visibly supportive of AOC at the start, nodding, smiling, even mouthing encouragement. That morning his expression was blank. He looked conflicted. And that was the problem. In a defamation case, credibility is everything. Sympathy alone won't win a verdict. You need the truth. Plain and provable. Julian's 9-second statement hadn't just questioned AOC's story. It recentered the entire trial. Suddenly it wasn't about who said what, who remembered who. The public, meanwhile, was divided. Progressive commentators on cable news defended AOC fiercely. They called Vega a political tool, accusing Kennedy's team of exploiting an old friendship gone sour. But independent voices were less kind. One viral clip came from a podcast titled Civic Minded, hosted by a former law professor. Here's the thing the professor said: when a plaintiff puts their reputation on the line, every brick matters. And Julian Vega didn't throw a brick. He just removed one from the foundation. The structure collapsed by itself. Meanwhile, Kennedy's team stayed quiet. They didn't go on TV. They didn't tweet, because when you're winning in silence, there's no reason to shout back inside the courthouse. AOC's attorneys began to feel cornered. They tried to paint Vega as an opportunist, but that backfired. When they brought up an old college newspaper article in which Vega had praised AOC, hoping to trap him in a contradiction, he simply said, "I admired her. Doesn't mean I still do." That kind of honesty is hard to argue with. By day's end, the only thing the prosecution could do was stall. They requested a recess, tried to regroup, and quietly debated whether it was better to push forward or fold. But the damage was done in the hallway outside. A reporter asked AOC's lead attorney, was putting her on the stand a mistake? Shh. Didn't answer in politics. Perception is half the battle. In court, it's everything. The jury didn't just see a case fall apart, they saw a movement misfire, because the lawsuit had promised righteousness, proof, vindication. But all it delivered was doubt. And with every passing minute, the jury's sympathy drifted, not toward Kennedy, but away from AOC. That alone was enough to sink the case. And still, those 9 seconds echoed. Louder than any speech AOC had given, louder than any objection in court. The silence afterward. That was the real sound of a legacy shifting. The final day of the trial arrived like the quiet before a thunderstorm. No press gestures, no campaign signs, no press frenzy. Just a subdued, almost eerie calm hanging over the courthouse steps. Inside, even AOC's most loyal followers looked uncertain. Kennedy sat with his usual laid-back demeanor, but there was a steeliness behind his glasses, like a man who already knew what was about to happen. The judge gave his instructions to the jury with precision, emphasizing fairness, evidence, and the burden of proof. But by now, it felt like a formality. The jurors filed out, and the waiting began. People say time slows down when everything's on the line, but this was different. Everyone wanted it to go fast. Even AOC. She kept glancing at her watch. Her attorneys avoided eye contact with each other. The entire room was shrinking in on itself, and then barely. 90 minutes later, the jury returned. That was fast. Too fast. AOC's side knew what that meant. The foreperson, middle-aged man with a neat tie and a firm voice, stood and read the verdict. On the matter of Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez v. Senator John Neely Kennedy, we find in favor of the defendant. A hushed gasp filled the room. No cheers. No shouting. Just shocking. In some cases, acceptance. Kennedy didn't smile. He simply nodded once, like a man who had never expected to lose. AOC blinked slowly. Then she closed her eyes for just a second. No tears. No outrage. Just stillness. She didn't look at the jury. She didn't look at Kennedy. She gathered her notes, whispered something to her lawyer, and quietly walked out. But the fallout had only begun. The media, which had once been eager to spin this into a political lightning rod, now had to shift gears. Headlines read, AOC falls short in courtroom showdown. Kennedy walks free thanks to a witness from the past 9 seconds that changed everything. Social media exploded with clips from the trial. Julian Vega's brief testimony was reposted millions of times across platforms. Memes emerged, some sympathetic, many critical, but one moment in particular went viral. The exact second when AOC realized the jury's verdict. The camera had caught her expression calm but crumbling, and it was everywhere within hours. For Kennedy, this was more than a legal win. It was a vindication. Proof that truth, at least in this instance, had won without spin or spectacle. He gave one short statement outside the courthouse. I've always believed in the courtroom, not the court of public opinion. Today, that faith was rewarded. He didn't gloat. That was part of his strategy. The high road was his terrain now, but AOC, her base was fractured. Some defended her fiercely, saying the system had once again failed a woman standing up for her dignity. Others quietly wondered if she had overreached, mistaking personal grievance for public injustice. In Washington, the ripples were already felt. Allies avoided comment, opponents pounced, and in the middle of it all stood Julian Vega, the man who never intended to be the center of a political firestorm, but who had become the spark that burned through a lawsuit. In a legacy, the courthouse may have gone quiet, but the rest of the country was anything but. News networks dissected every frame of the trial's final day. Legal analysts, political pundits, and social media influencers all rushed to stake their claim in the narrative. Yet despite the noise, something had shifted, a subtle but powerful recalibration of how the public saw both Kennedy and AOC. AOC, once hailed as the defiant torchbearer of a new progressive era, now found herself in an unfamiliar role, the silent figurehead of a miscalculated move. She didn't hold a press conference, no grand rebuttal, no fiery tweet storm. Instead, she released a short statement on social media. I brought this case to defend my name. The jury has spoken, and while I disagree, I respect the process. I will continue to fight for what I believe in, not through courts, but through the causes that matter. It was graceful, it was mature, but it wasn't enough to stop the damage. Critics called it a retreat. Her most loyal fans called it dignified, but the mainstream reaction is disappointment. Because even those who wanted to believe in her case couldn't ignore the facts. And those 9 seconds, those brutal, truthful, unspun 9 seconds kept playing over and over again. Meanwhile, Senator John Kennedy saw a resurgence. He hadn't just won a legal battle, he had reclaimed a chunk of his image, long dismissed by progressives as a comic relic of Southern politics. Kennedy had done something few politicians manage. He let someone else do the talking, and it worked. His approval ratings in Louisiana jumped 5 points within 2 weeks. Interviews flooded in. Late-night hosts cracked jokes in his favor for the first time in years. But Kennedy stayed quiet. No victory laps, no headlines begging for attention. When asked if he planned to sue AOC in return, he simply said, "I'm not interested in revenge. I'm interested in doing my job." And maybe that was the final twist, because for once, the man known for his sharp tongue and colorful insults had gone quiet. That silence? It spoke volumes, but the most unexpected figure in the aftermath was Julian Vega, the witness. The friend turned foe, turned reluctant. Hero he declined every major news interview, no podcast tours, no op-eds, just one handwritten note posted on his private blog. Truth doesn't need a microphone. I said what I had to say. I hope we can all move forward now. That message, raw and untouched, was screenshotted and reposted across the internet. People were hungry for sincerity. Vega had delivered it again. In the months following the trial, Washington slowly returned to its usual noise. AOC resumed her legislative work. Kennedy returned to the Senate floor in Julian Vega. He went back to teaching high school civics in the Bronx, but no one involved would ever quite be the same. Because sometimes, in politics, the battles that shape legacies aren't fought in the Senate chamber or on the campaign trail. They're fought in 9 seconds of truth, and once spoken, that truth doesn't fade. Months passed, the storm died down. The headlines shifted. America moved on, as it always does. But for those at the center of the lawsuit, the events didn't just end. They evolved. The courtroom drama had left a mark deeper than any news cycle could fully capture. It didn't just challenge careers, it reshaped narratives, especially for AOC and Kennedy. For AOC, the fallout became a mirror. She doubled down on policy, pushing bills on housing reform and environmental justice. She became less visible on social media, more present in committee rooms. The fiery, quick-to-speak representative was now more measured, more focused, and that wasn't by accident. Insiders revealed that her inner circle had tightened. She no longer relied on viral moments to move her message. Instead, she let her policies speak louder than her persona. She knew she'd lost something that day in court, not just the case, but the armor of invincibility. But in that loss, she gained something more human, humility. In a rare podcast appearance 6 months later, when asked about the lawsuit, AOC answered with calm clarity, "You learn a lot about yourself when you're told you're wrong. It hurts. But I'd rather hurt and grow than stay comfortable and stuck." It wasn't an apology. It was evolution. Meanwhile, John Kennedy's star continued to rise not because he flaunted his win, but because he did the opposite. In a time when politics is often about owning the other side, Kennedy's restraint made him stand out. He joked less, legislated more, and his ability to stay above the noise gained him unexpected allies across the aisle at a fundraising event in Baton Rouge. A reporter asked Kennedy what he thought of AOC now. He paused, smiled slightly. "She's tough, smart, and she'll be back stronger. I may not agree with her, but I don't count her out." That quote made headlines not for its heat, but for its grace. It was a quiet olive branch in a political era starved for decency. As for Julian Vega, the man who delivered the 9 seconds that unraveled everything, his life settled into something even rarer: peace. He declined offers to run for office, ignored publishing deals, stayed in his community, working with students, teaching them how government really works, not just from textbooks, but from experience. He became something few witnesses ever become: respected, not weaponized. And so, the case that had promised scandal, spectacle, and a scorched earth finish ended not with a bang, but with a series of transformations. It reminded America of something important: that truth still matters, that silence can be stronger than shouting, that a single moment, 9 seconds long, can bring more change than 1,000 tweets. And in a world obsessed with constant motion, it was a rare reminder that some legacies aren't built on winning or losing, but on how you carry both. This wasn't just a lawsuit. It was a turning point for AOC, for Kennedy, for all of us watching. Because in the courtroom where politics meets truth, every word counts but sometimes. It's the ones we don't expect that echo the loudest.